The wind over the Montana plains carried the smell of dust and pine, whispering across the endless stretch of land that belonged to Elias McGraw, a man known as much for his silence as for his skill with horses. The locals said he'd buried his voice along with his wife 3 years before, when fever swept through Red Creek and left him a widower with an empty house. Since then, Elias spoke little and kept to himself, living among cattle and wind. The townsfolk pitied him, but no one tried to reach him, until the night the thunderstorm brought someone to his door. It was near midnight when he heard the banging. At first he thought it was the wind. Then came a faint cry, small, scared, and human. He grabbed his lantern and rifle, pushing open the door against the storm. A young woman stood on the porch, soaked to the bone. Her dress was torn at the hem, her eyes wide with terror. She flinched at the sight of the gun. "Please," she whispered, "don't hurt me. I'll work for food, anything. Just don't send me back." Elias stared for a long moment, the rain running down his face. He lowered the rifle. "You'd better come inside," he said quietly. The fire crackled as he handed her a blanket. She sat near the hearth, trembling, clutching the wool to her shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked. "Anna," she said. "Anna Reed." Her voice was soft, the kind that sounded like it hadn't been listened to in a while. He nodded toward the kettle. "You hungry?" She nodded. He filled a bowl with stew left from supper, setting it in her hands. When she finished eating, she looked up at him, fear flickering in her eyes again. "You're not going to send me away?" Elias shook his head. "Not tonight. Storm's too bad." Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent as rain. She whispered, "Thank you." Over the next few days, the storm gave way to clear skies, but Anna didn't leave. She rose early, helped with chores, mended clothes, and cooked meals without being asked. Elias tried to keep his distance, yet her quiet diligence filled the empty spaces of the house. One morning, he found her brushing one of his mares in the stable. The horse, usually skittish with strangers, stood calm beneath her hand. "She likes you," he said from the doorway. Anna smiled faintly. Animals don't judge the way people do. Elias watched her a long time. No, they don't. It was the first time he'd smiled in months. Little by little, fragments of her story came out. She had come west with a traveling family, promised work in a merchant store. But the man who'd hired her had other intentions. When she refused, he struck her and threatened worse. So she ran miles through rain and mud, following the railroad until she reached the open plains. "I just wanted to start over," she said, staring into the fire one night. Elias nodded, understanding more than she could know. "Seems we both lost something we can't get back," he said quietly. From then on, they shared more than chores. They shared silence that felt companionable instead of lonely. Spring turned the valley green again. Anna planted flowers by the porch. Elias rebuilt the corral. They rarely spoke much, but the air between them changed, warmer, lighter. One evening, she found a small bird's nest fallen from the rafters. Inside were 2 unbroken eggs. She cupped them gently and looked at Elias. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the wind knocks us down so we can find a safer place." He met her eyes. Maybe so. He fixed the nest back under the eaves. When their hands brushed, something stirred in both of them, a quiet, fragile hope. The townsfolk began to notice the difference. Elias came to market again, tipping his hat and even trading jokes with the blacksmith. People whispered about the woman who'd tamed the silent rancher, but neither of them paid it any mind. One afternoon, the merchant who'd mistreated Anna rode into town. He spotted her buying flour, his grin turning cruel. "You run off, girl," he sneered. "Thought you could hide out here?" Elias stepped forward before she could answer. "You've got no business talkin' to her," he said, voice low but steady. The man scoffed. "She's a runaway." "She's under my protection," Elias said. "And that's the end of it." The merchant's smirk faltered. Something in Elias's eyes, quiet and dangerous, made him back away. Anna stood frozen, breath trembling. When they rode home, she whispered, "You didn't have to do that." He glanced at her. "Yes, I did." That night she couldn't sleep. She stood on the porch, moonlight silvering her hair. Elias joined her after a while. "I owe you more than I can ever pay," she said. He shook his head. "You don't owe me a thing. You've brought life back into this place." She smiled sadly. "And what about your heart? Did I wake that too?" Elias looked at her, the years of loneliness catching up all at once. "Yes," he said simply. "You did." By summer they'd fallen into rhythm. Two lives bound by quiet trust. Anna's laughter filled the house, and Elias found himself listening for it. He built her a new garden fence and repaired the roof she said leaked. Every act of care spoke the words neither dared to say. Then one evening she asked, "Do you ever miss her? Your wife?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Every day. But grief changes shape after a while. You stop looking back so much." She smiled. "Then maybe it's time you look forward." He reached for her hand, rough and calloused. She didn't pull away. Autumn brought golden fields and cool nights. They harvested together, laughter echoing through the hills. When the first snow fell, they sat by the fire, sipping coffee while the wind howled outside. Anna leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But right now feels good enough." She smiled, content. For once, the silence between them needed no filling. Winter tested the land again. The storms were hard, and a fever swept through nearby farms. Elias rode into town with supplies, returning to find Anna caring for a sick neighbor's child she'd taken in temporarily. The sight of her, rocking the little girl by the fire, humming softly, melted something deep inside him. When the child recovered and left, Anna turned to Elias, tears in her eyes. "I thought I couldn't care for anyone again, but she reminded me there's still goodness in the world." Elias smiled gently. "You reminded me first." As spring returned, the valley bloomed brighter than before. The wildflowers near the fence line burst into color, the air filled with birdsong. One morning, Elias saddled 2 horses. "Come on," he said, grinning. "Got something to show you." They rode out to the far hill where the land opened to the horizon. There, beneath an old oak, stood a small wooden cross, his wife's resting place. "I used to come here every week," he said softly. "Couldn't let go. Thought if I did, I'd lose her forever." Anna placed a hand on his arm. "Letting go isn't forgetting," she whispered. "It's making room for what's next." He turned to her. "And what's next, Anna?" She smiled through tears. "Maybe whatever we build together." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small silver ring, simple, unadorned. "It was my mother's," he said. "If you'll have it." Anna's breath caught. "Elias, I." He took her hand, eyes steady. "No promises you don't want to make. Just stay." Her tears fell freely now. "I'll stay." That summer the ranch thrived. The air smelled of hay and rain. Travelers passing through would sometimes see a woman hanging laundry in the sun, and a tall rancher beside her, mending fences, laughing softly at something she said.